Hello, everyone. My name's Chris Fletcher. I'm Associate Professor in the Department of Geography and Environmental Management at the University of Waterloo. I'm a climate scientist and a contributing author to the sixth assessment report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. I'm here today to speak about climate science and climate change projections, what we can expect across the world, in Canada, and in Waterloo region in the coming decades. I'm going to speak about emissions reductions and the impacts that can have on climate change projections. Let's begin somewhere that we're all incredibly familiar with, our amazing planet Earth. This is the view from space from NASA's Blue Marble. So here's the climate system with clouds and aerosols and land and ocean and ice in all its glory and complexity. Let's start by thinking about carbon dioxide, which is the most important greenhouse gas in terms of climate change, and what carbon dioxide has been doing in the atmosphere for the past 800,000 years. And basically what they've been doing is oscillating around values close to sort of 250 or 225 parts per million, occasionally peaking when we come to interglacial periods and then going down when we have glaciations, but never getting above 300 parts per million. And that brings us all the way up to the near past. And so it's of great interest to see what's been happening since that time. And that is shown by this dashed orange curve. And you can see that carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere are now unprecedented. We are above anything that's been measured in the ice core record up to now. So our fine planet Earth has a problem. And like any child that is spiking a fever, we're spiking a CO2 fever, and we have lots of other symptoms that go along with that as well. So firstly, the temperature of the Earth has been increasing since about 1850 and has warmed by almost 1 degree Celsius over that period since the Industrial Revolution began. This is the global average, so the average of the surface temperature of the entire planet. We can break down the warming and look at what's been happening across different regions, and the pattern looks like this. So the redder, purpler colors are more warming, and you can see generally there's more warming over continents than over ocean, and there's more warming at higher latitudes, so over Canada and parts of northern Eurasia, down in parts of South America as well. This is all consistent with our understanding that greenhouse gases are driving warming of the climate system, and that warming tends to be maximized in areas where there's lots of snow and ice, like Canada and Eurasia. But it's not just temperature that's a problem. We're also seeing changes in the climate since pre-industrial times in things like snow cover. So there's less snow on the ground in spring. There's much more heat that's measurable in the upper layers of the ocean. The amount of frozen Arctic Ocean that we see, this is the sea ice extent, is decreasing somewhat dramatically. And the sea level, as the ocean warms, is rising because the water volume in the ocean is expanding. And we've seen a pretty steady increase of sea level since 1900. As well, there's been well-documented increases in record-breaking heat events that are associated with these observed changes. So all of this evidence points to the fact that Earth has a problem, Earth has a fever, and this is something that we need to take seriously and think about what's going to happen in the future. So in order to think forward into the future, climate scientists need to use computer models to make projections about what the climate system is going to do in response to increasing greenhouse gas concentrations. So here's Earth again in all its complexity, but here's what Earth looks like in a computer model world. And this is what me and my research team tend to spend most of our time looking at. So the computer model is a digital representation of all of the complexity in the climate system, and we can use this tool to make projections and predictions about what Earth's climate is going to do in the near and the long-term future. And we do that following things called scenarios. So we run what if type experiments, and we say, well, what if our emissions go on unchecked and we have no success in mitigation, what will happen to the climate then? Or alternatively, we can ask, well, what if we're successful with mitigation and able to reduce emissions significantly? What will happen then? So here's that global average surface temperature metric again, and I'm going to show results from climate model projections for two different what-if scenarios. So the red line here shows a what if we don't really do anything to do with mitigation. This is what if we carry on with our business as usual. And you can see that the amount of warming that we get far exceeds that 1 degree that we've already seen. In fact, it looks more like 3 or 4, possibly even 5 degrees. However, if we are successful with mitigation and we're able to dramatically reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, in fact, take emissions to net zero or below, then we can follow something like the blue curve. So climate models are very useful for telling us about what potential changes might happen in future if we follow particular emissions scenarios. Here's what those projections look like in a spatially resolved way. So we can see that for temperature warming, again, much more over places like Canada and the Arctic and more over land than over ocean. If we think about precipitation, then generally countries like Canada and Northern Eurasia and other northern regions will experience increases. So generally that means more rainfall because we're getting less snow in the winters in Canada as the climate warms. But there are also regions that will dry, particularly those that are already drier to begin with, such as these in the subtropics of the North and the Southern Hemisphere. So big changes are afoot if we fail to make any kind of success with mitigation. But climate change is happening on small scale regions, and that's how it's going to affect individuals. So what can we tell about climate projections for regions like region of Waterloo? So we did a study in 2015 and we looked at many different metrics of climate change to do with temperature and precipitation. And this was one figure that really stood out. So if we're thinking about extreme heat, those really hot days in the summer when the temperature goes above 30 degrees Celsius, then the number of those days that we have at present is shown by this dashed black line. It's around 10 days per year on average where the temperature goes above 30. In the 2020s, in the near term, that number's not going to change very much. It might increase a bit, but have a look in the 2050s and then by the 2080s. And this is when our decisions about emissions and mitigation really make a difference. Because if we follow that business as usual trajectory, then by the 2050s, we could be seeing as many as 30 days above 30 degrees. That's a whole month of 30-degree plus weather. And then if you look to the 2080s, we're looking at almost 2 entire months of the summer where temperatures exceed 30 degrees in Waterloo region. Contrast that with the net zero emissions trajectory, and we're able, under that scenario, to keep extreme heat to levels that are very similar to today. So there's an urgent need for action on emissions reductions. And I can demonstrate that by looking at these figures from the IPCC special report on the 1.5 degree target from the Copenhagen and Paris agreements. So here's the observed trend in temperature shown by the gray line. The red line shows exactly how much of that is due to human activities. And that takes us right to about 2018. Let's think about what is in store in the near term. So basically out until about 2040, the next 2 decades. Well, regardless of what we do on emissions, the fact is we've baked some climate change into the system already. So there is warming that we have committed to based on our past emissions, and really nothing that we can do between now and 2040 is going to have anything to do with the warming that we see. We can't really get out of that. And so we're expecting potentially another almost half degree. So getting to that 1.5 degree target is not going to take very long. However, we need to act soon. In fact, we need to act now, because whatever changes we make today will not be felt in terms of climate change for another 2 or 3 decades. And that is shown by the continuation of this graph out to 2100. And this now follows a bunch of different scenarios for what if we're able to dramatically reduce emissions such that we hit net zero. So in order to stabilize, flatten the curve in terms of temperature increase, what we need to do is something like this to emissions. So here we are today in 2020. We basically need to begin cutting emissions and continue cutting them to reach net zero around 2055 or even 2040 to achieve this blue curve in terms of stabilization. So we really have to get moving now, and there is an urgent need for emissions reductions in order to see the temperature respond in the next 30 or 50 years. I could say a lot more on this, but I don't have time. Please reach out to me and contact me if you have any questions. Thank you very much for your attention. Bye for now.